I'm going to show you briefly something about ontologies and vocabularies. So now we've gone through, so we have identification, we've got data coming out well identified. The next problem is, how does an aggregator verify that the data that I get from one place has the same basic meaning as the data I get from someplace else? So we saw the Field Museum showing data with different names for the properties than somebody else shows the property. Is that or is that not the same property? Now you know that if I call something last name, that's an American presentation of that idea. Surname is another name for the same thing. Spanish, family name. All of that represents the same thing, except some people have two family names. But what can you do? All of you have two. So anyway, I'm going to talk about that idea, that we need precision in the presentation of the information, and how RDF is kind of the key to thinking about that. And then we'll look at ontologies and a little bit of vocabularies. So we want our data to be used by others, so we have to be precise about the property names, the names for the properties. Or, if you like, the identification of the properties. We don't care what name you use for the property, we want it to be identified as the same thing. Okay? And if, well, it's even more than that, but that's the idea, is that instead of having names for properties, we actually want to have identifiers, globally unique, resolvable identifiers for these properties. So if I use last name and you use surname and somebody else uses family name, all of that has the same exact identifier because it's different names for exactly the same property. So you can call it what you want, but it really means exactly the same thing, so we all use the same identifier. So identification comes into this now not about identifying the objects so much as identifying the properties that the objects have, the attributes. And transformation tools are very important. The 3 different ways of representing latitude and longitude, right? You've got degrees, minutes, seconds, you've got degrees, decimal, and you've got UTF, is that right? Something. The one that uses the UTM. There you go. So believe what I say, but be skeptical. That's a good example, right? I knew it's something, but and so we need these transformations, but we can't do the transformations until we know exactly what the properties are, so that we know that if I give you decimal degrees, that's a precise property, and I know how to transform that into degrees, minutes, seconds. Or I know how to transform decimal latitude and decimal longitude to UTM, and vice versa. So I don't want anybody to be, see, I quit doing this talk at some point. I don't want to turn you into RDF experts. I just want to give you an idea about why we look at RDF. And the primary reason is that RDF presents things as an object has a value for a property. 3 pieces. An object, a resource, they call it an RDF, a property which is identified. The resource has an identifier, it's actually presented as its identifier, the property has an identifier, and the value, what we see down here in the second bullet, that the value can either be a simple value, like a number or something, or it can be another resource. If it's a resource, it has an identifier. So RDF is completely presented using identifiers. Every resource and every property is presented by its identifier. And the great thing is, we have the identifiers themselves, or the properties exist in a structure that allows a certain kind of inference and manipulation of properties. If, for instance, we had decimal latitude as a property, and it's precisely decimal latitude. It's a Darwin core property, for instance, decimal latitude. And we wanted degrees, minutes, seconds, which is somebody else's carefully defined property. Then we could actually take a triple that gave us decimal and transform it into a triple presented as degrees, minutes, seconds. So RDF is very simple. It's just a set of these triples, always three things. It supports sharing, it supports inference, and there are semantics as well underneath it. So if I tell you that the property decimal degrees is related to the property, or decimal latitude is related to degrees, minutes, seconds latitude, those two are related, how am I going to express that relationship between those two things? That there is a transformation that changes one into the other. This is where ontologies come in. So an ontology is a vocabulary. It's a set of terms, but it has relationships among those terms as well. So typical relationships are like same as, this thing is the same as that thing. So A is a resource and B is a resource, and this asserts that they're the same thing. So it's two identifiers for the same thing. That's what same as means. That we found out that these two identifiers represent the same thing, and we add this triple that says these two are the same. An inference engine, therefore, can say if A is the same as B and B has a scientific name, then A has a scientific name. Because that's what same as means. It allows this inference. So ontology is terms like same as together with transformations possibly between these terms. So synonymy is expressed in ontology, same as is synonymy, right? Is a part of. So there are lots of interesting. So in exporting data as RDF, we have to decide on the properties to use. And it's very important that the community adopt properties and vocabularies. So the vocabularies you could think of as the names of the properties that things have. And the community needs to adopt them. And the good thing is that there are standards going on that are exposing a lot of properties. So FOF is a good one, friend of a friend. It has a lot of properties about people. So this property we were talking about, last name, surname, family name, that's a FOF property. Okay, so there's a property, and FOF gives it a name and has it gives it an identifier, and there are lots of names for the property, like common names you could think of. The identifier is the official name, and the common names are the ones you see on the labels. So friend of a friend is very useful, and we use friend of a friend for anything about people. Why do we use it? Isn't there something else? Well, we adopt it because we think that's the one that's the best to adopt. It's the most widely used, and everybody adopting it makes it more widely used. Dublin core. Well, Darwin core is an obvious one. Darwin core is a vocabulary. It's a set of properties. It's been adopted as a standard within the biodiversity informatics community, and we should use it. As much as we can, we should use it. If we find things that we need to express that are not properly expressed in Darwin core, then by all means introduce a new term and use the ontology capabilities to connect it with the Darwin core terms. So it's a little different from, it's similar to is a property that we could insert there. And the properties themselves become resources in the system. So a property is a thing and has an identifier, and so you can make triples that involve properties as resources. That may be a little complicated. Maybe you need to say that over in Spanish. And I just wanted to point out that when we look at things like OWL : same as, that's an abbreviation for the real identifier. So OWL stands for http:// something or other. It's using XML style namespaces. So that's an abbreviation. When I say OWL : or DC terms : That's an abbreviation for the full identifier. It's not a URI, it's an abbreviation.
Web semántica, ontologías, ¿de qué se trata todo esto? Se trata de que todos compartamos los mismos conceptos, de manera que las bases de datos se refieran a las mismas ideas de la misma manera. Si conseguimos eso, podemos hacer que esa comunicación, que ya va siendo obvia dentro de nuestras bases de datos, donde este ejemplar pertenece a esta localidad, pueda ir más allá del sistema nuestro de información. Si todos, por ejemplo, nos referimos en nuestras bases de datos a esa localidad de la misma manera, podemos saber de manera inequívoca, con precisión, qué ejemplares hay en esa localidad. Y para eso hay un esquema que se trata de adoptar un esquema universal, basado en relacionar conceptos. Los términos que se emplean para relacionar esos conceptos, tenemos distintos vocabularios. El friend of a friend, el amigo del amigo, o los términos de Dublin Core, o el lenguaje para manejar ontologías. Una ontología es un lenguaje común para referirnos a una misma porción de la realidad. En nuestras ontologías aparecerán especies, especímenes, localidades, personas que identifican, etc. Y todo ello, bueno, pues para lo dicho, para que los sistemas puedan comunicarse entre sí de manera inequívoca. Y una de las ideas que aparecía en la información del taller, convertir todas las colecciones que hay en el mundo en un único sistema de información, gracias a que compartimos los mismos conceptos con las mismas tecnologías.
So RDF is a way of transporting data. It's a strategy for taking data and exposing it. It's not the only way, but RDF is interesting because it imposes so many restrictions on what you're allowed to say. You cannot say that something has a property without clearly identifying exactly what the property is. You can't just say, here's the name of the property. That's not enough in RDF. But what we know is that it's really not enough ever. If you're going to export information, it has to be done in the context, and we call this serialization. Turning information that's complicated in structure and turning it into a bunch of text or something that can be transported. So RDF is very good as a way of presenting the information divided into these little pieces that allow for lots of inference and other analysis of the data. So again, the importance here is that the vocabulary that we use to represent the characteristics, the properties of the objects, is very important and needs to be precisely described.
Y los RFs son una manera de presentar la información uniformizada. Y los RDFs imponen muchas restricciones a la hora de presentar esa información, pero por otra parte permite presentar prácticamente cualquier información contenida en una base de datos de manera uniforme. De hecho, hay herramientas que convierten bases de datos relacionales en una tabla enorme de 3 columnas, que es lo que es un RDF.
Ustedes permanentemente han estado ligados al trabajo con las ontologías y lo hacen de forma casi que intuitiva al encontrarse con conceptos que están relacionados entre sí. Y esa relación, como en el caso de los nombres científicos, puede ser una relación de sinonimia. Uno es el nombre preferido, es el nombre aceptado, y los otros son nombres que han sido asignados a ese concepto de especie, por ejemplo. Pero al mismo tiempo, esa especie es un subconjunto de un conjunto más grande que es el género. Entonces, la relación que hay entre género y especie es que la especie simplificándolo un poco, por supuesto, hace parte del género. Entonces, esa relación entre esos dos conceptos, el concepto de género, el concepto de especie, el nombre científico aceptado y los sinónimos asociados, esa pequeña cadena es una ontología. Y esa ontología la manejan ustedes permanentemente cuando están gestionando su colección. La idea con este lenguaje normalizado es que además, así como lo podemos entender nosotros, las máquinas lo puedan entender y lo puedan leer. Y eso es muy evidente cuando se desarrollan portales para visualizar los datos de las colecciones. Fíjense ustedes que muchas veces llegan a nosotros usuarios preguntando por especímenes con un nombre científico, y posiblemente ese nombre científico ya no se usa para esa especie o ya no es válido. Si nosotros podemos tener relacionados esos dos nombres, el válido y el no válido, los sinónimos, entonces podemos ofrecer a los usuarios o a quienes consultan una mayor cantidad de posibilidades. Y sucede muchísimo también con colecciones históricas, colecciones que tienen un valor porque registran lo que ya no existe, pero también tienen nombres antiguos. Entonces, si podemos hacer búsquedas que incluyan tanto los nombres válidos como los no válidos y ofrecemos como resultado ese gran conjunto de datos, pues estamos respondiendo de una manera más certera a las solicitudes de los usuarios. Ahora, por otro lado, también en cuanto a vocabularios, permanentemente también ustedes en la gestión de colecciones hacen uso de vocabularios, y vocabularios para referirse a países o a regiones o a municipalidades, municipios, estados, etcétera, etcétera. Lo importante de estos vocabularios es que facilitan también tanto los procesos de digitalización en las colecciones, a la vez que permiten una normalización o una estandarización ya a la hora de mostrar información hacia afuera, agregada a partir de las distintas consultas a las diferentes colecciones. En una misma entidad, por ejemplo, en una misma institución puede haber varias colecciones, y es a la hora de mostrar las colecciones integradas donde adquiere muchísimo valor el poder contar con vocabularios tanto para los valores, como presentaba Greg, así como para las propiedades o para los elementos que son los que se están describiendo.